without further ado, let me introduce you to Richard Shuttleworth.
Can everybody hear me? First of all, everybody hear me clearly? Yeah, good. Okay, I'm all wired up, ready to be electrocuted. Okay, so it's a real pleasure. Thanks, Vince, for inviting me. It's a real honour to come back to Singapore. I used to live in Hong Kong for about 7 years. Worked for the Hong Kong Rugby Union as a coaching executive between 95 and 2000, and then I left to go back to the UK. But it's great to be back to Asia, and looking forward to it. So Vince asked me to talk to you guys about constraints coaching. I don't really like the word constraints, to be honest, but that's the way it's happened, and what I'll try and talk to you guys. First of all, put your hands up if you've heard of constraints-based approaches or constraints coaching. About 4 people, so this is all going to be new stuff. Put your hands up if you're a coach at the moment. Coach. Okay. And sports science? Okay, those of you who are not coaches, I guess we'll have some administration people at the back there, or other people who work within sport. So primarily I'll try and mix this up for coaches and sports scientists and practitioners and teachers as well. Okay, those of you who might be familiar to some of the research, Jai Chow from Singapore as well, a fellow colleague when I was in New Zealand, he was there as well, and he was doing some research in non-linear pedagogy, and that uses a constraints-based approach as well. But what I'll try and do is bring it to life for you a little bit. Okay, hopefully you can see this, but generally we have a triangle, and we have the movement, decision-making, action happening inside. And we have various constraints which interact to help develop skill. And when I talk about skill, I mean effective movement, decision-making, action. And the task constraints are primarily the most important constraints that a coach can consider. There might be a focus thing on this, let me just double check. It's probably a bit better. Okay, and we'll go through these through some video clips. So when you run coaching sessions, the goal or the purpose is very, very important. So I work with coaches about trying to make sure that the purpose of the task in the session, we understand why. And the athletes or the learners understand why this is important for performance and development. If they don't, then you don't do it. Because the athletes are doing something, they don't really know why, and too much of this goes on this day. Rules and regulations you have in practice are very important. So the rules help shape skill. Space and boundaries, equipment, and information that the coach gives about the task, like instruction and feedback. And then we have player constraints. So the learner or the individual, mentally, physically. So just somebody tell me some physical constraints that you could manipulate in a training session. Anything to do with physical. Anybody here who's done a training session who's manipulated something physically, mentally, or physically? What would that be? Any suggestions? So there's probably some team sports and individual sports. I'll give you a couple of examples. Basketball, often we put the Australia women, the tallest girls, against the small girls. We do that for 10 minutes because the tall girls, when they shoot for the basket and it rebounds, they can't get the ball back. The small girls get in and protect space really well, and the tall girls struggle. So we'll always play 10 minutes of small versus tall, so the tall girls develop skills of anticipating and protecting space. Okay? So these constraints are really important. You need to manipulate these in your training sessions because it helps skill to emerge. Mentally, you could make your athletes under pressure, so there's consequences in training. Practice. Okay, when you've done 3 successes, you can go home. Or you may say 3 failures and we're off. That's it, training finished. Or you can say, right, which team's going to win this? For 5 points, next 2 minutes, each try is worth 10 points. The consequences become higher. Okay. okay? So there's mental pressure, and these things are really important for skill. And then the environment, we have physical, so that's like the surface, any equipment, objects, anything you use, you should be manipulating it as a coach. You need to be changing the equipment all the time. If you keep the same equipment, the skill becomes too consistent and they don't adapt. So you need to change your equipment, not all the time, but you need to manage the variability, how much you change your equipment, okay, is your choice as a coach. That's the art of coaching. But you need to change, otherwise a person's movement skills becomes very static. Socio-cultural, Singapore culture will be different to Hong Kong, will be different to England. You look at footballers coming from Brazil, South America, very creative, take a lot of risks, but very skillful. They don't go to academies very early, so they don't get coached, overcoached. In England, you go to academy very young, at 7 or 8, and you have a referee, can't do this, can do this. So there's no pulling the shirt, there's no cheating. So we don't get to learn those tricks. Whereas the Spanish and the South Americans learn a lot of skills, which is to protect space and deception. We don't pick up on this as quickly in Western culture, Anglo-Saxon. It's more top-down. You must do this, this is the way you do it. So socio-cultural is very important. That's why I think team sports are much better in Australia and New Zealand, because there is less structure, there is less top-down. Players just have fun and they try different things. They're very creative, and this is why I think team sports in the South are actually a way for players to express themselves. England is very good at individual sports, going backwards. Generally. I'm joking a bit here, but there's a cultural aspect to sport, okay? And you need to identify yourself and your identity in Singapore. This is crucial to your athlete's development as well. Okay, so that's the constraints framework. Some things that you can manipulate is like equipment. We developed these in Australia for rugby and Aussie rules. We've got a ball here, it's like half a squash ball. Why would we do that? Why would we put that in the glove? What skill will that help? You're catching, gripping? Gripping, definitely. So, gripping is a technique. When does it become a skill? Do you know the difference between technique and skill? So to grip a ball is technique. To do it skillfully is to what? Is to catch the ball and it doesn't drop. That's being effective. So that's an effective or successful technique. Under pressure is a skill. We need to coach skill, not technique. So what we do is we manipulate equipment, and technique has to adapt under pressure to become a skill. So when these players get very tired, and they're like, and when you put your hand out to catch a ball, what happens when you're tired? You let the ball hit here. It hits there and it goes out. So good players will use their fingers, dexterity, adaptive fingers, even when they're tired. So when you put these gloves on when you're tired at the end of training, you'll see some players dropping balls, but other players won't. So that's an example of manipulating equipment. You can use eggs, yeah? If you want soft hands, just get some eggs and throw them up, and they've learned how to softly catch balls like that, okay? So just manipulating different sorts of equipment. You have to smash a few eggs though. So we've got the constraints. We manipulate these in practice, and I'll give you some examples soon. The athlete though, when they become skillful, they perceive information and they act on this information. There's no chicken and egg here. You don't start here and finish here. You start here, finish here. So we're always perceiving, we're always acting. So what happens when a golfer hits a ball onto the green? they get onto the green, what do they do when they jump onto the green? What do they generally do when they're going to take their putt? What would you do? You hit the ball onto the green. What's the first thing you do when you're about to do your putt? What do you do?
Change the club.
Sorry?
Change the club.
Change the club. Good man, that's the first thing. So you know you're going to do a putt. What information do you need to help you do the putt?
The line of the ball.
Environment. So you're going to search the environment straight away. So if you're a coach, you manipulate the environment. Different greens, different surfaces straight away when they're young. Don't play on perfect conditions. Play on different conditions for young kids. So they obviously have to search the environment straight away. It's the first skill of a skilled athlete. They're very good looking around and adapting to their environment. Okay, so when athletes come to the institute here, that should be a core skill. Don't spoon feed them and tell them everything. They must be active in picking up information from coaches and sports scientists to help themselves. So yeah, to do a putt, what information do you need?
Where's the line of the ball?
Yeah. The slope, the line, the distance. So you walk around like this. You pick up information. If you don't, you just stand there. You don't have enough information. So movement and perception are the same thing. You can't perceive and stand still. You actually have to move. So your best athletes are good movers. You have to have good movers because they're picking up information. On the football pitch, if you're a striker, you look at Messi and Ronaldo, they'll stand in a certain area and they'll keep moving around like this, just watching, picking up information, then they go. Okay? They're not just standing there and coached to be in a position. They're moving, picking up information for their next action. Okay, so this is really important. So as a coach, you have to manipulate perception. You can do this in your coaching because it helps create skillful action. Okay, so that's generally the model. You can use goggles for football. A perceptual training. You can't perceive the ball once it comes to here. You either go like this, and then someone's going to tackle you, or you have to use your foot to feel the ball. All right, so foot's up, very important because you can feel the ball, all right, and you can use more parts of your foot to pick up information, perceive the ball, and it allows you to act quicker and more adaptively. So a heavier ball, a smaller ball, balls that are on the ground all the time. You have to use your feet. Okay, so things like this, there's a lot of research going on with these goggles at the moment. Olympic sailing.
Wave, it seems pretty stable, not much swell. You can see a few little trails across the water.
Okay, that's one of the Australian sailors I work with. We put the goggles on them and we see how much perceive of the environment, the wind shifts, where they're looking for information. Okay, and you'll notice your experts generally will be picking up information sooner and they have much richer information to make better decisions. Okay, so they're better decision makers because they get more relevant information, more important information. Generally, less skilled learners are looking all over for information to support. It takes longer because they can't recognise any patterns and they use sometimes the non-relevant information. So they do an action off wrong information. So they're slow, they take too long, or they do the wrong thing. Okay? So perception is really important. Another example. I put the goggles on the sailors and one set of goggles is flashing. So you miss information and you have to be able to anticipate where you are in about a second time. So just for general training. And it's really interesting actually because one of our sailors who came first in the Olympic Games in London, we put the goggles on him And we have a sailor who's number 3 as well in the laser, 1 and 3. Tom Slingsby, number 3. Another Tom, forgot the surname. We put the goggles on and they love it. They're like, wow, this is great. It's a challenge. You put it on number 57 in the world, in Australia, this is shit. What's this got to do with sailing? I'm missing things, I don't want it. Tells you the difference. Your good athletes will accept a challenge and they will find a solution quickly. So the skill is to create problems for your athletes, not big problems, just manage the problems for them and support them to find a solution. Because they will have to find solutions under pressure. It helps us and the coaches. So the athletes will look at these videos and reflect and think, our training is not designed properly. We need to change what we do to create more opportunities. Or how do we stop missing opportunities? Where should we be looking? So the players are coaching each other. We have a higher level of peer coaching, player-to-player coaching. Okay? They now have a responsibility when they play for England to be coaches. So we're all coaches now. Okay? The head coach, which is Danny, supports the players to coach. And we now will generate leadership. So everyone's a leader. Okay? Everyone's a leader. Everyone has a responsibility to pass information. So coaching is really moving forward. I'm going to show up a really busy slide. This is the one I use with coaches, and I think it's actually, I'll put this down a little bit because I think it's missing something at the top. If somebody could just move the projector down a little. Okay, so who's heard of implicit coaching, implicit learning? Okay. I would like to think that everybody puts their hand up. In England, I try to make sure in England rugby, every coach in England is coaching implicitly. The athletes need to learn and they don't know they're learning. And this is the skill of a good coach, to use implicit learning. So I'll talk a little bit about this. We're probably very good at this. Telling the player, giving them the rules, explaining, demonstrating. Okay. This one here, internal focus, external focus. Some of you may have heard of this. So an athlete focuses on their movement, okay, the kinematics, the angles, the biomechanics, the sequences of the movement, and down here they focus on the effect of their movement. So what effect am I having on the ball, or the racket, or the environment, okay? This is where skill happens. So up here is more technique, and down here becomes skill. So if you start up here, you need to move down here as quickly as you can, under a constraints approach. So you put constraints in there to switch their attention to something that they're doing, to the effect that they're having. So in a team sport, the effect on the opposition or the opponents, or a defender. In an individual sport, your opponent, or any equipment around you. So you thought you were going to come up and present that. Would have been sacked. So internal, external focus. So you need to switch quite quickly here. But generally, don't look at things as a dichotomy, either or. You can't get one without the other. If I was to ask you a question and you would think yes or no, you have to know what no means to say yes. So everything is complementary. You can't get a dichotomy on a dimension. So internal focus, you can't do it without actually having an external focus. So something is causing the effect on the ball through your movement. So good athletes occasionally will start to think about their technique or their movement. They'll be quickly switching to the effect that they're having on implements and equipment or opponents, okay? You can manage this process. The bottom one is certainty and uncertainty, and I'll be speaking about it this afternoon. The feeling is we spend too much down here. Pre-planning action, uncertainty. We make our athletes feel very comfortable, and when they come under pressure and things change, they become very uncomfortable and they can't adapt. And I think managing this continuum is very important, where we put athletes further down here and make them feel a little bit more uncertain, but we support them. You have to support them through that process. Okay. Drills versus games. I wouldn't enter that argument. I would call it a continuum of information. So up the very top is static information. An athlete sees nothing changing. So it allows me to focus on movement form. I can now do reps, get the feeling, get coordination. So I'm now focusing, I can predict the cues because they're never going to change. Or I do a drill where there's only one option, just passing to the left or the right. Don't spend too long down here, but sometimes you have to. It's your choice when you go down there and how long you go down there. Erickson's theory would probably be 10,000 hours down there, but I'll be switching. As a young kid, you switch. This is more dynamic, where the information is changing. So you can manage the picture that an athlete sees in training. Suddenly it's switching, it's more dynamic, it's unpredictable. So that's where decision making comes in down here. All right, which skill do I need to be effective? Up here, they already know the skill. You've pre-planned it. So there's limitations of spending too long up here. England football, England rugby spend too long up there. What I've done here is a lot of information, but you will get this, so you don't need to write it all down. I just want to tell you the most important things with constraints. What we try to do with athletes and coaching is we want to know why we're doing what we're doing. Because this is really important, okay? Part of that process is to engage the players. Engagement. If we don't have an athlete engaged in your practice session, stop. Go home. Give the athlete the choice. If they're more responsible and they think, just not getting it today, I'm going to go home, that's what some of the good athletes are doing now because they're controlling their learning curve. It's not the responsibility of the coach anymore. We're trying to help the learning curve, but the player and the learner is responsible for it. So I'll give you some examples how to do that later. So we need to engage our athletes before we do any sort of coaching really. Okay? In coaching we need to create the need. So in a good session, a well-designed session, you'll design pressure in your practice session where an athlete thinks, I need to do this, I need to be better at this, I need to do the smash, I need to come in and disrupt my opponent. If you don't create and design a practice session that creates a need, go home. Why is the athlete doing mindless repetitions? They need to feel, I've got to do this to get better, I've got to do that. So the institute here is like a learning institute. High performance just means you're very good at learning. So you need to create a need in here for athletes to think, if I do this and do this, that's going to help me. So creating a need is so important on and off the pitch. After this, you give them an opportunity to perform those actions. So if you were to do game sets, TGFU, or a design of a drill or anything, they have an opportunity to act now and express themselves. The importance of actions provide opportunities. An athlete must understand, if you do this, it's going to create an opportunity for you. They're very opportunity driven. So when you design constraints, you always design around opportunities. Opportunities to use that strength, to use the strength. Expose your athletes sometimes, some of their weaknesses. Expose them in a training session so they come off thinking, I'm not getting any opportunities, I need to be better at this action. Okay? So you've created an awareness that to create more opportunities, I'm going to have to improve my actions. Okay? And then you pressure the actions. You pressure them in training. And what it does is it challenges the player to find a way. This is where they adapt their techniques. So technique is not perfect. There's no such thing. It's just a movement. But put it under pressure, it adapts itself, and they have to find a way for it to work. And that's where true learning takes place. That's what we call deep learning. And that's what your session should be about. They try and find successful outcomes with that way, and then what you need to do is make sure that the information in the training session is very specific to the game or the sport. Okay, they're making decisions based on information in the game, and that has to be designed into your session. This is the last one of this particular slide. designing what we talked about around the problem. This is what I really like about learning. Learning is not repeating a solution. It is repeating the process of finding a solution. It takes you a while to get your head around that. Some of you may have heard this, of course, but Eddie Jones loves it. England football now are sort of using it. So if they see a coach and they do the same drill twice, and the player already does it twice, perfectly, effectively, stop. And they move on. You have to do something different. So the athlete now is aware that if I'm just passing the ball to my teammate on the side here, I can't give the same pass twice. I've got to move the ball to make him and challenge him. And he's going to do the same to me. He's challenging me. And suddenly you get this mutual skill that's going on, like a tactical thing that's going on. So we're moving away from this mindless repetition now to a tactical skill element. And the players have to be responsible. You need to talk to your more skilled players about taking that responsibility and peer coaching that. So in hockey, when they finish training, they'll go and do their sometimes skills. They'll pick 3 or 4 players and they'll design some really, really good pressure skill training sessions now, which they design. They come to the sports science and the coaches to help them design them. Okay, this is really important. When you look at the skills of your athletes, we call it a skill toolbox, or your capabilities, your ability as an athlete, that needs to match any potential opportunities if you're going to get better as a player. So, you all see young players, girls and boys, and they try and do things and it doesn't work. What they're seeing opportunities, potential opportunities, but their body is not capable of executing and being effective. That's great. That actually should be celebrated and embraced. You need to go with that and celebrate it, praise the decision making. Don't worry about the process. That comes later. So if you're coaching in a very early age group, don't make the outcome the process of the movement. Make the outcome a decision. Or try to be saying, well done, that was a good idea. But to be more effective, i.e. the action, you may need to work on that a bit. You need to be able to kick the ball a bit further. And so what you'll notice is when you're not there, they'll go and play games by themselves where they do those long kicks. You don't need to tell them. You've created the need in those players to want to get better. Who remembers when you were young, particularly when I lived in Australia and England, we had backyard games. Play in the backyard all day. That's where you develop those skills. You don't develop them in organised sessions today. So we need to get back to that. So remember, the toolbox, your capabilities need to match the opportunities. So I see this opportunity, but my skill level is here. Once you get this, then you start to get very effective athletes. Okay? And you have to design sessions with the opportunities for that skill. Alright, so what drives behaviour? You're creating through this an intention in the player. My intention is to go forward. My intention is to support to go forward. Principles of play in team sports. My principles of movement in individual sports are coupled with attention. I'm talking about perception. So my intention, I want to do this. What information do I need? I need to attend attention to this information to help me with my intention to act. So this is critical. I actually think that's the most important thing in a coach, is coaching intention. What is your intention? Why did you do that? And find out why the player makes those decisions. And then you can guide them to more important information. What about that defender over there? What about this player? And then you can help them with this process. Like these things as a coach to help that process. And that's what I just talked about. Inside of that, make sure that their skill capabilities match the opportunities inside. So they're probably the key things, I think, in designing a session. The more practical side of it, I'll go through this with examples now, will be this. So invite the action. This is the Australian women's water polo team. What we were trying to get them to do was play cognitive engagement, engage them in training. We had a shooting practice session for the Olympic Games. We wanted the girls to be better at deceiving and throwing shots in and being very unpredictable. So what we did was a very simple game, divided into 6, and if the girl shoots in any part of these, she gets 2 points. If she can shoot here, she gets 6. But she makes the decision. She tells the goalkeeper, top right, 6 points. So the goalkeeper knows this is 6 points. And what we do is we keep the score for 6 weeks. And we tell them we're going to select them for penalty shootouts for the Olympic Games based on their scoring. And they play this game every training session, 5 to 10 minutes. And the goalkeepers are selected on the points, how many points they concede. So she knows that's 6, so she needs to stop this. She needs to get it in here, so we've automatically got a competition. Competition, a mind games competition. So skill will happen now. You're going to get skill. So she's pointing, she's just pointed up here. She got the 6. She just wasn't good enough. Got the 6. Top right. Nah, she went for 2 points. She didn't think she could get the 6. So it keeps going. A fun practice session for them to get better. This is the #1 sailor in the world, Tom Slingsby. Have a look what he's doing. Okay, I'll show you again. They do a lot of this sort of stuff. So when you're in the laser, you make the problem bigger by standing up. So your centre of mass is up here now. The boat becomes more unstable, more fun, harder, more pressure. He's the one who drives the training. He wants to do it all the time. He does it in very high winds, 24 knots and stuff. Okay? But if you look at it as a sports scientist, skill acquisition, biomechanics, movement science, you're amplifying the problem. The problem is centre of mass and the roll of the boat. You have to coordinate the roll with the centre of mass and the steering. So you move up the centre of mass, and now you've got to use the roll to coordinate those pieces of information. So we call it co-varying. There's extra things that they can control. We call it degrees of freedom. Extra degrees of freedom, like pitch, yaw, the trim of the sail, the tilt of the rudder. That's up to the sailor to control. But they generally will fix those so they don't have to control them. And they learn to unfreeze their body, so they become more skillful on the boat, the bigger the problem is. And they just have games where they do this again and again, and it's quite fun, and it's implicit learning. And he falls off and he has a bit of a laugh. He enjoys it. Okay, at the end of every training session, they sail home. And then we're on the speedboat, and they can surf, going on the wave. And there's normally about 7 or 8 boats going home after training. But what happens is there's only room for one generally. So the sailors who are not good at staying on the wave fall off the wave and have to sail home, and it takes them an extra 45 minutes to get home. So the fun is staying on the wave as long as you can, so you get a free ride home. Alright? So after every training session, they all look forward to this big competition. There's about 3 boats there, 3 boats here, and they're all jostling each other to stay on the wave as long as possible. But they're learning how to surf, and they've got so many degrees of freedom they're controlling. Anyone into sailing here? Or? Oh, good. I thought I was talking to myself a little bit before. I had to learn about sailing. I didn't even know you could sail. I thought you could sail straight into the wind, but it took me a while to realise that you couldn't. You have to go a little bit either side. But upwind, okay, we have a lot of boats who challenge each other, and Victor Kovalenko was big on some boats weren't making good decision making. They were too concerned about certain things inside the boat. And what happens was, when you've got a line here and you're heading upwind, this boat here was challenging it. And sometimes the sailor gets too focused on this. There may be a wind shift coming in over here. These boats perceive, they see it, they change, they tack, they look for this information so they can go faster. This boat gets caught up with him. So they get this, what we call a competition between two, a duel. And often he tries to stay in front of him because one of the principles in Australia is if you keep turning in front of the boat to keep them behind you. So he has been told by the coach to try and, a word for this, annoy him. Take this guy off this. So we 2 or 3 sailors in training are told by the coaches to muck up the other sailors, destroy the other sailors from sailing well. So he could be Tom Slingsby. And if he keeps going, he's done his job. He wants to drag him over here. Okay? He wouldn't do that in competition, but we do it in training, and we don't tell them. So we brief some of the athletes in training. We do this in rugby, in football, in other sports as well, where you create scenarios for athletes to go out and destroy training for others. And you see how they adapt mentally, physically. So if he's taken off course, good on him, done his job. He's probably he's going to tap in front of him now. So we create this uncertainty in the training environment. We're going to have a bit of a break at the end of this, and then we'll get back into it. But this is busy, I know, but this is the constraints now for the practice session. What as a coach will you vary? So these are the important ones here. You can vary the purpose, the type of skill that you'll be practicing. You vary the picture for your athlete. You vary the start position. You vary the pattern and vary the end point. So these are generally the ones which I think are pretty important for a coach to consider in designing their session. So those are the major constraints. I'll just show some videos now on those particular aspects. So anyone into football? This is AIK in Sweden. Okay, what they're practicing. Anyone into football? Yeah, a couple. No more drills. This is a game where these 3 are trying to play back out with the goalkeeper. So it's a 4 versus 3. Distribute the ball from here. And the goalkeeper has to work with his players to find a way out. And these are the endpoints. So the endpoints are varied. There's 2 endpoints. You start by delivering the ball in a different direction. It creates a different problem. And the defence have to be able to win it and score a goal as well, otherwise you don't have competition. You must have competition in training, so defence, attack, attack, defence. So if I work with a coach in the England youth football, I will tell him, I'll show him my diagram, what can you vary? So when he goes here or here, he will vary the distribution, the timing, the location. Better, who could you get to do this? Who could you get to distribute the ball? Players. Get players to do it themselves. Because what actually happens is you watch, well, they'll distribute the ball for the first few times nice and easy, and then they'll start to vary it. And then they start to think about, what effects is having? And then you coach the coach. You coach them coach. You step back and you let them put pressure on themselves. Say, why are you making it easy, Jim? What could you do to make it harder for him or easy for him? And then you get them tactically thinking about training. Okay, so we have to give more responsibility in a way when they're at that appropriate level. This guy won gold in, I think it was India, in the Commonwealth Games. I worked with him, and there was 3 of them that won the team gold. He was 16, 17, at the AIS. We changed our technique a little bit from the Korean techniques. We had Korean coaches for many years. And then I worked with our head coach, Simon Fairweather, who won gold in Sydney. He had never had a coach in his life. He was never coached, and he won gold. And then suddenly he was the head coach of the AIS team. And I said, he looked at me, are you going to help me? And I'm like, I don't know much about archery, mate, but I'll help you. So we just played games. One of the best games we played was this, Connect 4. He puts a lot down to this. You have two of us competing against each other and you've got to get 4 of the same colour. I get 3 blue, well invariably he's going to try and get that blue, so I have to go for another one. What you've got is you've got variability in the endpoint, but it's implicit. They have so much fun that they're not realising that they're adapting their technique even slightly. Okay, so the process is varying. We put a time limit on the game sometimes. You've only got 2 minutes to win the game. What I do is I use the variability in the process here. So what we've seen through the kinetic force plates is you have what we call variability in the movement, and it starts to come down narrower and narrower, so individual technique becomes quite sort of less variable at certain points, forwards and sideways. But when you come to shoot, it's never like this. You have some variability on the kinetic force plates. There has to be, to keep the end point the same. So you can go like this and not move the end point. Good athletes can do that. Yet what we did in the Korean technique was everything was solid. And because we had to go so far back, here, athletes were struggling. And then the whole thing would move and they couldn't control. So we went away from that. We did too much work in the gym, trying to get our back stronger to hold the arrow in the perfect position. We were getting injuries and some of our archers left. They didn't want to do archery anymore. They actually didn't enjoy it. So we had to change the culture. Don't shoot 500 arrows, shoot 100. Quality arrows. If you're happy with it, you can go. So we just changed the culture. We didn't go back to this. We went to a point where they felt comfortable, they leaned forward. So it's a little bit like this. We changed the technique, and what we did was we introduced different instruments and equipment to create variability, and they had to control the endpoint. So we put vests on. This is a weighted vest. So as you lean forward, the weight takes you further forward, and then you have to push back by your feet. And if you're on these, it's even harder. So we did a lot of training with that, and you will notice even golfers use those techniques as well.
And this was Ivy and Zato on the practice range getting ready for this round. Judy, this is a little unusual warm-up technique there.
I tell you, I love this, and I just happened to talk to Pia Nilsson and Lynn Marriott, who have been instrumental in turning her around in the last year or so. A lot of what they have done is try to take the tension out of her game, and these balance drills have helped to relax Ivy Zato. They also help, for any of you who are trying to do it, to increase your core strength. But that is not nearly as easy to do as it looks like watching.
So you've got to ask yourself the question, why are some athletes under so much tension? The way we coach often. Elbow, shoulder, brain thinks. We go to controlling our movements. So we get what we call cross-talk. Across your joints, the muscles tense up. Try and control it instead of actually being quite loose and relaxed. And thinking about, trying to keep my balance underneath instead. And the body starts to become quite loose. So we try to put more noise, more variability into the movement, but only so much as that they can control and actually get the end point in the execution of it. Also used a thing called...
Get ready.
I did some apps, and they would have the speaker in, and they'd have to get their shot away before the... If the arrow went now, no points. So I was sitting there getting nervous, and get ready. They don't know how long they've got to get ready. So they're trying to go to their normal, oh shit, suddenly hear it, and they have to accelerate the movement. And we found in a couple of competitions, athletes tend to go like this. If it doesn't feel right, they go back down. And then they go again. And suddenly they've only got 15 seconds. Why would you ever go like this and then back down? Does anybody do any shooting or archery or anything? Diving? You know when they take a dive on the board and they go like this? That's not good. Stop, come back. Well, we at the AIS, we banned it. We call it balking. So in archery now, you can't go like this and then go back down in training. You're not allowed to do it. So it forces the athlete to have to think, shit, it doesn't feel right. I'm got to do it. And they try and make it work. Sometimes it's not pretty. Watch them in the diving. We got a lot of Chinese coaches, and they've come across to this now. They actually quite like it. So when the diver comes in, they'll probably do a belly flop on their first dive because they always want to stop. But now they have to do it. I've got some great video clips of some terrible dives in training. After about 6 months, the dives get better and better and better. And what they learn to do is, as they're coming to the end of the board and it doesn't feel good, keep going. Control it, get a good outcome. So we do that now in archery and diving and other sports. Okay. So that's a constraint you can manage. Vince, what's the time now, mate? 10:40. How long have I been talking about? 11:30. So what's it now? Sorry.
10:40.
All right, so I'm just going on. We'll do a little bit of a break and a practical. Just wanted to go a little bit more about the sailing. So I want to give you an example because the skills of the sailors, generally they'll do a warm-up with a figure eight. Do you guys do figure eights? Yeah. Well, we kind of had this idea. How do you get more skill out of these things? Turn it up.
You guys go between these. You guys go between the drills, between the double-handed boats.
Okay, so what we've got is we've got a figure eight, but we've got a lot of different boats sailing. So there's a lot of different classes of boats, and it's very annoying for some of the sailors because they're competing against a windsurfer, a laser, a different class of boat. As they go around, the sailor has to make some sort of decisions and adjustments to their skill. And we have this thing where if we pick up the anchor and let the marker drift, that creates uncertainty. It creates information that only your best athletes can adapt to. And I understand with looking at dynamical systems chaos theory, you make better decisions now if you tend to be aware of the displacement of the marker. So this space here will allow the boats to adjust to the movement of that marker, but most of the sailors are not aware. They don't know this happened. They don't know it's moving. So the line of the adjustment of the boat will be different for the better sailors. They're making adjustments around here because they've scanned already, they've looked behind. If not, they're looking at the boats here. Why is that boat coming at this angle instead of that angle? And they're making adjustments here. So we're creating a better awareness leading up to it and around through the movement of the marker. So just taking the anchor up. What you'll find in sport in general, is who's got athletes that make big adjustments to their movements, technique. They don't gradually make adjustments and adapt, they actually make big changes to what they're doing. And that's a sign that the athlete is struggling to actually make adjustments. I do this a lot with the canoeing and the other sports, and I'll just wait until this catches up. Sorry about this, because it's a bit of a slow process. The boat comes around, detours, don't worry about that. This one is here. So we use the polar GPS from land-based stations that accurately read our boats in Sydney Harbour. They can be read up to 10 to 15 centimetres. But you've got to read all the winds and the tides, you've got to know all that information. But the boats that do this, instead of this, that's the same as football, it's the same as rugby, it's the same as any sport. Athletes who make these big adjustments, they're not perceiving the information because you haven't put them into practice environments where they need to scan, they need to look for that information. So the key message here is always force athletes to have to look for information. Keep changing this information and forcing them to have to adjust their movements. And this is just sailing, so many other sports. So those of you who, in the old days where we had lots of cones and markers, do you remember that when we used to play sport? There was like 4 markers and you have to stand on the corner, pass the ball, run to this marker. If you play that now, just pick up the markers as they're playing and they won't see you. So just walk around, pick up the markers as they're doing the drill. What do you think will happen? What would generally happen if you pick the markers up? Yeah, it starts to go out of shape and it drifts. It starts to drift. But your good players, they start to look at where the people are and they'll try and keep the shape. Because they're aware of that. Whereas other players are not aware of information around them. So over 20 years, it's so simple. The messages I try and come across to you now is you have to vary. You've got to vary things all the time. And it creates a higher level of awareness to perceive change in the environment. Do it all the time. When you've got to catch a bus to training, make it turn up 5 minutes early. Some athletes will panic, you know, if there's a sudden change in the schedule. So you manage that change. It's a way of creating a sense in an athlete of awareness and how to control and regulate their movement. Come a little earlier, talk to your teammates. Okay, so this stretches on and off the area pitch. Okay, so that's that diagram there. I'll finish with the water polo. I worked with the Australian women's water polo team. What we're trying to do here, we're trying to get more goals, more shots at goal. And we know generally these are the areas where we can create opportunities. It's easier because they will defend mostly in here. The role of the players is to try and create opportunities in these areas. So I'm sitting behind the goal here, and I'm controlling these players, and I get to release them. So just watch what happens, and it takes a few minutes. Sorry, the music. The girls are trying to find the solution on how to get into positions to score goals. Trying to break this. She hasn't lost a defender in that space. She's trying to find options in here when they're by themselves. Still struggling. So I make it easier. I release somebody from the right. Now she perceives her. Straight across, and in. So as a coach, I'm trying to break that. I'm trying to get them to look in these areas. Now she's realised that she's come out, she's dragged that player across. Nothing's, yes, now she's found her. I can help with this by releasing players from the left and the right. So we're training our players to perceive opportunities in areas that they never really perceived before. We're putting pressure on the shot by using this, so they can't see, and they have to adapt the type of shot. Right, so it's suddenly a low shot. Suddenly you can see the goal, has to adapt the shot. Using pool noodles. So this is more easier, and then the girl who's holding the noodle will change it to make it a little bit harder in these last few clips. Just a sudden change at the end, which has to stretch higher. So what we're trying to do there is have adaptive shoots, adaptive shots at goals. You need to be careful when you do this type of work, especially with your really most elite athletes, because risk of injury. We did get some girls with strains because they hadn't done that type of shooting. They had the same amount of shots, but they'd never really had to do stuff outside of what they're comfortable with. So if you're trying to train creativity or adaptable movements, you have to be quite careful. You have to work as a coach with your staff and support staff to say, we're going to do some movements here which is pushing pushing the boundaries, okay? But what the girls get from this, you just speak to the goalkeeper. They think it's even harder now to look at what type of shot she's doing. So just speak to the goalkeeper, they can't defend those types of shots. So that's an example as a coach of just manipulating. This is a game where we changed the colour of the ball. A red, you had 15 seconds to shoot. So she's got a lot of time. So she's looking for opportunity. Not yet, not yet. Has she got an opportunity? She's got to shoot now, it's up to 15. See, bad shot, she took too long. 15, that's green, 5 seconds, gets it in straight away. Why? It goes on like that. Why does that happen? You give somebody time, like golf, they end up analysis and paralysis, they get the yips, they do stuff. You say you've got 5 seconds, you go up there, got to get going, bang. So time constraints are really, really important in your training sessions. Not all the time, but every now and then, okay? We do it in water polo, you get more goals, simple as that. They got the ball, they know they've got to get it away, they'll look. And if I can't, I'll affect the defender and I'll pass it. So she's got a really good opportunity and we work together under time constraints. Under more time, you don't work together, I'll play individually. So these are some of the strategies. Okay, look, I just think it's time for a break now. I've probably gone through some videos. Is there any questions up to now? Because we'll have a bit of a tea break and we'll come back. And we'll do a little bit of practical as well in the second part. But this morning was about that diagram, and I just wanted to show you that diagram and get you comfortable with it. And I'll just bring it up now before we break, just so you can see it. Okay. So you'll get a copy of this, but what I was showing you there was this bit here. We're varying the process or the purpose of the game. We're varying the picture all the time, the start point. The movement pattern varies, and the end points vary. Lastly, what does this mean? How can we vary an intra and inter skill? How can we vary an intra and inter skill? So if you've got a drill and you're repeating something, is that intra or inter skill? Intra. Yeah, intra. So they know I'm going to be doing this type of pass. So as a coach, you're thinking, shit, okay, we need to put pressure on it. Quicker. This time a bit slower. This time over to the left. This time higher. So you're doing intra, but you need pressure, variability inside that one skill. Because if you don't, you're going to get repetition with repetition. You want repetition without repetition. That's what you need. You need repetition of the skill, but without the repetition of it. And you need to vary stuff as a coach. If you don't do it, your athletes need to do it. They have a responsibility now to put pressure on each other just to get better skill. So that's the videos I showed you were basically all of these ones here. Okay. After the break, I'll finish off with a little bit of this stuff up here, and that will take us around the whole thing. And hopefully, we can do a bit of a prep and have some questions and talk about it a bit more. So we'll break now for a drink and a bit of a rest. And if you want to hang on, people still come, but may just start anyway as they're coming back. I had a few questions during the break, and it's questions that we would normally receive for the last since I was at the AIS and the EIS as well, team sports and individual sports. Some of the questions are, this is only a framework, not from a book. It's me as a coach. I've coached for 20 years as well. Actually, at the same time I was doing my sports science. So I was a coach for 10 years, then went to university, finished my masters, and then the PhDs in skill acquisition. Then I went back to the EIS and worked in skill acquisition, human movement science, with individual sports and team sports. So Australian rowing, We did a little bit of the shooting, the archery, the individual type sports. So this is really a conceptual framework of trying to help a coach. And so when I work with a coach, we will generally go through these things. And he'll say, at the end of a session, we'll do a review. And I'll ask him, how do you think it went? It wasn't very good, was it? Why is that? I just don't think I engaged my athletes today. They weren't there. So what are some of the strategies to engage your athletes? I didn't vary anything today. They got it, they were successful, but I didn't change anything. Or it was too difficult, there wasn't much success. I didn't think they got it. It just turned into chaos. So we start to look at some of these things in here. So this is not a different way to coach. This is coaching. Some of you do it, but you will also get traditional coaching, which hasn't done much of this. And it's very hard suddenly to think, how do I start doing this and what's the benefit? What am I looking for? And that's quite difficult to understand at times. So working with coaches, particularly at the Olympic Games level, like with archery, with Simon Fairweather, those coaches understand because they coach themselves. And they always set problems for themselves. They used to do archery while they were doing the big test. So he would do half the big test, come back, and he would try and get away 6 shots. All right, and he would do different things. He'd have to sprint to a different marker. Then he would have to go away and do a cognitive game on a computer. Very, very taxing, and then come back to the archery. And then we'd move the lane ropes from the archery. So suddenly there's no ropes on the ground, and you look at that thinking, have you moved the target to 80 meters? If you move the information away, they can't tell the distance. All right. So that very, very clever ways of putting in variability of the picture and the skill to train skill under pressure. Otherwise, you're just repeating technique. If you heard of the word paradox, I was just talking to one of the shooting coaches before. Some coaches struggle because they think, hang on, we need consistency. But why are we trying to vary them? Because we need consistency. That's the very thing. You don't separate consistency with change. They're together. You as a coach put change in there and they try and stay consistent. The two go together. Okay? So when a young kid develops like that, they can change their technique very quickly. Tiger Woods. These top athletes, they will change their techniques when and where they want to because they understand why. And they've got good feel. They know when they change their movement, why and the effect it has. If you have athletes like that, they're quite easy to coach. If they can't have that kinesthetic feel and they're not very good at being general movement, they're quite hard to coach. So in your pathway, if you're working in a sport, a particular pathway, you need to have some principles in there. Some of these principles that are developing good movers, good feelers. So later on, they will be changing. I mean, Tiger now at the moment, he's changing his technique because he's had injuries. Other golfers, Rory McIlroy, they're coaching using high repetition, but there's much variation in what they do. Okay? If you look at exactly how their training occurs, they are varying lots of variables, but the athlete is in control of that. Okay, so that's really just the conceptual framework. Before we play around a little bit, I just wanted to give you this example here in kayaking. This girl here, when she was getting tired, she was falling to the right. Her technique was going to the right, and the boat was becoming unstable and slowing down. So normally, if you're tipping to the right, where would you stick the wedge? If you're turning to the right, under the right or the left? Yeah, well, traditionally you think you'd stick it under the right to put it back up like this, but you actually stick it under the left side of the seat so she goes out even more. Okay? So you amplify the problem. Try it in some of your techniques where you make the problem even bigger for somebody. Who does team sports and understands game sense? Game sense? Same thing. Play with a bigger space, badminton, with a longer court. You're making the problem even bigger, the space becomes bigger. And suddenly they become aware of the problem, and then they adjust their actions and their techniques, okay? So it's the same mechanism. You amplify the information, you amplify the problem. The All Black sevens teams do it a lot. They're suddenly playing this way, 50 metres, and then blow the whistles. They turn around, they're playing on 110 metres. And it's very hard to run into a space at 110 metres because they just follow you. So you have to run at them and then give a really good pass. It makes it really hard to play 110 metres. But the All Blacks can do it. But no other teams train like that. They train for consistency and set parameters. So that's just a little thing I showed you there. This is the feedback. Just remember with your athletes, the most important information from a constraints perspective is allow the athlete to use their intrinsic feedback. How they feel. What was the effect of what I just did? So feel, vision, sound, haptic, proprioception. As a coach, reinforce this. Allow them to process this information first before you intervene, before you interfere. Because they will become more reliant and dependent on themselves. Geez, that felt good. Had a really good effect. Don't interfere with it. Okay? Allow that process to take place. And then after this, they will therefore switch to some extrinsic feedback, augmented, which means extra information. And as a coach, try and hold back. Allow peer-to-peer feedback first. Okay, so allow the other person. So I do some stuff with GB Boxing, and they do it really well now. So the next port of call is this person. Whatever effect I'm having, I can see it on the opponent. And if I can't, during the break, I'll ask my teammates who are watching, having a rest. Go and talk to them. Give your teammates feedback. So any of you who do team sports and you have 3 teams and one team's resting and then comes on, they're watching, they're learning. They don't make the same mistakes the previous team does, and they talk to the team coming off. Okay? So you can get good extrinsic information for feedback by just not even interfering as a coach, but using a sort of feedback loop system with your athletes. And then the video comes in. You can have that in the training session. Allow them to use self-selected feedback when they like. It's up to them. And then come in as the coach after this process with immediate or delayed feedback. Allow this natural process to occur because athletes will depend on this information before they depend on the coach. I've got a lot of coaches ask me, how do I, they've come to me and sort of said the players are asking some questions, which are not really great questions. And I said, look, just say to your players, look, good question, but before you ask me, have a think of what I'm going to say. Think what my answer will be before you come to me. So when your athletes come to you, they have to guess what your answer is going to be. And they're going to think to themselves, crikey. And you'll watch their heads start turning over. Right? You're making them think and analyse before they actually even come to you. So we're starting more and more to not give feedback. We're now taking GPS away. We're still using it, but we're taking away data and we're not feeding it back. The athlete has to earn the right to get feedback now. They have to guess the feedback before they get given it. Because athletes are thinking they're tired suddenly because they've reached a certain data reading. Shit, you're in risk of getting injured, you're tired. In fact, they could run for another maybe 30 minutes and actually learn something new. What's my body capable of? So they must guesstimate, just guesstimation feedback. We're trying to use a lot more. What do you think you did? And then what we do is we look at what they predicted and what the data shows and then see what the gap is. And you've got to get that gap there. I worked with a lady at the Australian Supreme Court, Simon Fairweather's wife, Jackie Fairweather, was a middle distance runner in the Commonwealth Games, 800 metres. She was just coaching the middle distance runners and she put some starting gates inside the lab. and the girls had to run through the starting gates and do it in a certain time. None of the girls could do it, but Jackie did it blindfolded in exactly the time that she'd asked them to do it. Why is that, do you think? She said, I bet you can't run between there and there in 6 seconds. Why? What information are the athletes being used to right now when they run and they train? It's not feel. How fast do you feel you went? How quick do you think you went? They're done on the stopwatch. So they've got no idea how long it's going to take from there to there. They do set distances in training, whereas Jackie in the old days, she felt the ground moving beneath her. She could see how quickly she was going. She would regulate her rhythms, her tempo, and then she got given the time at the end. So she was always guessing. The older athletes were doing guesstimation of feedback all the time, whereas now they become dependent on extrinsic information and they couple their feeling to that. So they don't really have to earn the feedback anymore. So I worked with V8 car racing. Who liked cars? Car racing, V8 in Australia, Holdens versus the Commodores. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Racing around. And a guy said to me at this conference, he goes, the drivers are not as good these days as the old days. They're not as good in the car because all the machinery is doing it for them. It gives them feedback. So what he's done, once a week, he takes all the machinery off the car, takes it out of the car, and they have to drive the car around the track with no feedback in the car. And who does the quickest times? Are the drivers who can feel the car. If it's slipping, they'll get it back on track. The athletes that have been brought up on that feedback can't control the car when it's not there. Okay? So have a think about these principles of learning, because you can actually introduce that to you. Doesn't mean you don't do that all the time, of course. Try it out, because you need to make your athletes more sensitive to that information. And then video again. Athletes are very external focused. If you look at things like constraints coaching and non-linear pedagogy, one of the principles is external focus. Russia and East Germany were doing it well before anybody else. They had them on bikes, and each one of these, if he goes faster, his man went faster. So you can see the effect of what you were doing on the bike in terms of the little fairground, the little guys going around. That's external focus training. And that's been going for a long time. East Germany and their tennis as well. Boris Becker's academy used a lot of those concepts. So that's something that we can try and practical as well. I just wanted to talk about the last one, that diagram, which is, I'll pass that on. Equipment, we'll play around with some equipment now, but this is rugby. You look at the equipment, we have a softball, so when you pass it, if it's not a good pass, it will just fly, it exaggerates the flight path. Half the ball, very hard to catch, has very smooth paddles, so it's very slippery. We use a football in most of the training sessions now in rugby because that creates a good sensitive pass. And then we have balls like this, very hard to pick up. It's creating instability, so you're shooting up there even if your body seems consistent. So the whole time it's internal instability and external instability. So it's the decision of an athlete, they're shifting up and down. The coaches traditionally tend to want athletes to be down this end. But in effect, it's good to come up here as well, because this is where you adapt. So in this area here is the adaptive zone. That's where you adapt. And we think from the research is the optimal athletes spend the most time in here, in the adaptation zone. They come out of here when they need to, and they go into here when they need to. Like Tiger's probably coming out of here. He goes maybe back into stability, trying to confirm a new technique, and then goes back into variability. So that continuum of stability and variability is key in coaching. And understanding life in general. when you become unstable mentally, or you've lost your direction in life, sometimes you become very unstable and you look for stability in life. A partner, religion, it could be anything. So getting this flux of stability and instability is human performance. And it's very dependent on the nature of your sport. If your sport is very dynamic and unpredictable, you need to get used to being down here. But you're trying to look for this down there. You don't train down here, you train down here, but you want the consistency, which is context. Context-driven stability. It's not isolated mindsets and techniques that are pre-planned. Yes, they're your intention, you go in there, but you try and keep that consistent under those varied conditions. And that's where sport scientists can monitor those conditions. Sometimes they can measure, sometimes they can't. But ultimately, it's the athlete who feels it. They can start to feel things are changing. And the best athletes are the ones who really operate in that dynamic sport like sailing. I learned the most off our sailors. They tell the coaches to shut up about half an hour before the sailing event. I don't want to hear any more about the weather. They shut off. And then they just get a feel for the boat, they look around, they feel free, they go back into that intrinsic, internal feedback that they go through. So they know when they want to be stable, they know when they want to open up, and they'll ask a lot of questions when they want to become unstable again. 10-second rule, generally, allow an athlete to do something, the head goes down after they've done it, then they'll start to look up, look around, then they're ready for that information. Okay, so the needs of your athletes is really important. Good, so yeah, stability and stability. Yeah, we've got to do a run round. Come on, guys. Make him do certain movements. How do you think? I want you to go and explore, but I'm going to try and get him to do some movements. This is not allowed to touch your body, okay? That's not allowed to touch your body. He needs more training. Don't move your feet, don't move your feet. Okay, you're allowed to move only one. You're allowed to move 1 foot, that's all. So probably closer to the left. So you're balanced. You're allowed to move only 1 foot off the ground. Okay. Don't have to do that. So I can make him do different movements at the moment. He's going down, up, 2 feet off the ground. You're only allowed to take 1 foot off at a time. Don't allow me to touch you. Good. So I can get him to do different movements just through the pole and getting him to be very aware of his pole. Okay, so that's a constraint that is taking away certain space, but now he's got extra space to explore. So he's exploring movement, so a constraint is not negative. A constraint does not constrain you. It affords you an opportunity. So his opportunity now is to do a squat maybe, because he doesn't want to touch this, he's doing a squat. Maybe I want to keep him down there. Head up, so he looks at the pole now. Come down, doesn't want to touch his knees, so he straightens his knees. And now, he'll have to go with 1 leg up. Good. An arabesque. See if I can get him to do an arabesque. Okay, so you can explore this with your partners right now. And the other one is to use this as a constraint, so he has to touch it. So 1 foot touch the pole, 1 foot will come off the ground, so touch the pole behind you, don't move the other foot. Good. Okay, stay there, stay planted, just relax, 2 feet in the ground. Right, touch the pole, 1 foot, 1 hand, at the same time. Good, let go. Touch it with that hand, 1 time. 1 hand, just touch it. What are you going to do? It's going too far, you can't, don't hold it, just touch it. He hasn't learned yet that the other hand can come into use. Alright, so it's quite rigid. So what you do is with constraints you learn about people. So this sort of movement is haptic as well. Close your eyes and start to do it. So just close your eyes. Now feel the pole. Keep your feet planted. Good. So you can just play around. Well done. constraint is used to touch and to guide him. So dancers, you know, when they're there and then they hold a position and you hold them, touch my hand, you can feel it, that's physical guidance. So I can get him to do what I want by touching him and getting him to do the perfect movement, or I can take away space by using this, don't touch it, so he explores the open space, more creative type movement. No different to all of this. These are different constraints, but it's the same thing. So just take a poll now. I want you to explore with a partner different things you can do. Guys, we don't have time. You don't have time. No, sorry, I went over too long. Just on the constraint side of it, the questions. Is there any questions regarding today for the last hour and a half tour with your sports particularly? Anything in your sports that we can bring up and talk about now?
I'm free to introduce the constraints of the training.
Yeah. I think the first thing is what you are currently doing in your environment and your athletes, because this is based on the needs of your athletes. If you've got athletes who are very closed, they want information, they want to be told all the time, because this is based on athlete needs. Assess the needs of your athletes, and if they're very much down this end, it's going to take you quite a while to adopt some of this. Some athletes may be okay with it. They might be quite, like the sailors, when I put the glasses on, we had number 1 and number 3 in the world, always want new challenges. Give me those glasses. And if they miss a boat, they don't want to miss the boat, so they'll keep the glasses on, keep looking, whereas the others don't want it. So assess where your athletes are, and then think, how do I implement something like this? And talk to your athletes often, I think, with very, very rigid, stable athletes, explain to them. Look, today in training, I'm going to set you some problems. And you're not going to like some of them. They're going to be too big for you, too big a problem, but you have to try and find a solution. So today's training session is an opportunity for you to learn and explore. And I will vary some of the things today in training. So I'll probably prime them, I'll tell them that you're going to vary stuff. Other athletes which are down here, they need that challenge. So it will take longer for some athletes, and you can do it. Eddie Jones did it with the England rugby team in 1 week. We had a very structured team before. They don't talk, they just do. Coach, tell me what to do. Eddie Jones came in and said, in 1 year, you're going to coach yourselves. So he said, there's no excuses. You can't coach like an English coach anymore now. So he would go around, and I help the 3 coaches, and the coaches are not allowed to coach like an English coach. So he would walk around, Steve, you're coaching like an Englishman. Basically, you're doing repetition drills. Stop it. So if he sees you doing repetition, he'll stop. All right. So he's changing coaching behaviour, just like that. He's lucky though, you know, he's getting paid $500,000, and he's got coaches who want to listen because they want to be at the World Cup. Otherwise he will probably get another coach. So they're constraints. They're system constraints. Make sure you've got system, make sure you're aware of your system constraints and work within them, around them, through them. But I want the key message to be, it's your learners, it's your athletes, it's their needs. Don't go doing this stuff if they're way down this end, you're going to lose your job. You need to win 5 games to keep your job. Common sense. Add variability though, because if you want to be a high performing athlete, you need to be a good mover. You need to be an adaptable athlete that can do any system, any technique, any structure. And it doesn't really matter what sport it is, I think those principles hold true. Yeah, so hopefully that answered the question.
Okay, I've got to bring this workshop to a close unless there's another burning question that you're going to have for Richard. If not, can you join me to thank